welcome everybody to the city of Kuttenberg, a historic Czech urbanscape also known as Kutna, a place unlike anywhere else we can go in Kingdom Come Deliverance both 1 and 2. Here we're removed from the rural environment we're so familiar with, and thrust onto more densely packed streets, confusing alleyways, screaming preachers, towering structures, and traders on every corner. It's a place you'd no doubt anticipate to have its fair share of secrets, and sure enough it has a big one. You see, Kuttenberg here has a rather expansive underground tunnel network, silver mines that curiously intersect with the basements of houses. Almost every business is interconnected underground. It's easy to get lost in the unaccommodating dark of this multi-layered maze that for some reason everyone in the city seemingly has a door in their house to access it. Unsurprisingly, it's full of treasures implying the presence of ongoing smuggling activities, and along with these easy treasures come plentiful grisly discoveries. In the realm of discoveries to be had down here, one stands above the rest. Right, let's go find ourselves a vampire. To begin with, I'm going to come clean and tell you that finding this vampire is relatively straightforward, and no, unfortunately we will not get to slap it up. But if you'd be so kind as to humour me before we venture down into the tunnels and find this foul creature, there is something we can do above ground to make our lives easier. For this we'll have to venture to the east of the city to the Kuttenberg Gallows. For it's here that we'll find a man hanging out, and by hanging out I mean by the neck until dead and evidently since. His name is Angel, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, and it's on his remains that we can find a map of the Kuttenberg underground. I also took his pants. Anyway, this map is boundlessly helpful, as it details the tunnel network in accordance with Kuttenberg above ground. Whereas on the world map, even while underground, we won't get that information. So, for the sake of not getting lost, it's a bloody helpful bit of kit. However, that is not why we need it. Rather, it's because the map details what can be found down there, and what buildings grant us access. And one of these doodles accompanying the map is a crudely drawn bold face with pointy ears, a sharp nose, complete with what appear to be fangs, bearing a striking resemblance to Count Orlok from the 1922 German vampire film Nosferatu. So naturally, it's going to draw some attention, especially considering every other symbol on here either identifies a business through which we can enter the tunnels, treasures that might be found within, or ladders for the most part. But a face, that might require checking out. So naturally, the next destination we're going to want to check out is the entrance to the tunnels situated within the apothecary, as that appears to be the closest entry to this face. It shouldn't be too tricky to find. There is, after all, only one apothecary in Kuttenberg, and it isn't far from the Fountain of Perpetual Bafflement.
A fountain? Where does the water come from? Here, in the middle of the city?
It must be said, it is interesting. There's an abundance of various other business types, but only one apothecary in the city. But the master alchemist within explains that away, as most alchemists in Kuttenberg were on Wenceslas's side, and now the city's under Sigismund's control, they've made themselves scarce. Not to mention, herbalists are viewed with suspicion at the best of times.
For fools, it's enough to point their fingers, spouting nonsense about us colluding with the devil, or accusing us of poisoning.
But before we delve into irrelevance, let's find this vampire. One of the doors along the hallway from the front door to the rear entrance serves as the top of a stairwell to the basement. The cellar itself doesn't seem too out of place. being used as cool storage for ingredients and food. But in the corner farthest from the stairs, there's a door leading to the tunnels. Following this pathway will lead us to a ladder, taking us deeper underground. It's down here that we will find an open coffin. Within it, as expected, a corpse. And this coffin is surrounded by choice decorations, garlic, skulls, an abundance of candles, and an ornate chalice that will be coming with me, so if it disappears, don't be surprised. But to address the elephant in the room, we have the corpse. Dressed in a monk's habit, this bald man has a stone in his mouth, blood dripping from the corners. His head appears to be resting on a pile of bricks. There's a wooden stake jammed through the left side of his chest, and on his stomach rests an ornate golden cross. It is a very unusual burial, particularly considering he's not been buried at all. His casket, a mere box, has been left open for us to gaze upon his interestingly undecomposed corpse as it lies eternally still on some expensive-looking cushions. It would appear we have found our vampire. And as you can imagine, my first instinct is to take his golden chalice and his golden crucifix, because as far as I can tell, he doesn't need them anymore. But chances are good you're wondering, what makes this man a vampire? Good question. Well, you see, as I'm sure you're aware, medieval Europeans were a superstitious bunch, so the concepts of esoteric monsters and the restless dead weren't unheard of. In fact, they were far from new. Humanity and superstition have coexisted since well before history was ever written down. After all, assigning explanation to that which cannot be explained is an effective tool in bringing meaning to life and establishing, furthermore reinforcing, societal structure. So it may be a shock to learn that vampires' popularity in folklore is a far more recent thing than the 15th century. That's not to say nobody had thought them up yet, and it also doesn't say that vampiric entities didn't exist in various mythologies prior to the 18th century, where their popularity began to snowball. But the notion of a vampire as this pale, gaunt, slim figure, like this corpse we see before us, is a more recent interpretation. In medieval Europe, Christian churches viewed vampires as minions of Satan, assimilating the souls of sinners by drinking their blood. As such, a crucifix was said to ward them off, so I suppose it's fortunate there happens to be one here. As for why that would be necessary for a corpse, it's important to understand that vampires were classified as revenants, placing them in the company of reanimated corpses. Basically, the undead. The thought process there is, what is death to a being that is already dead? Simply put, if you suspect you've got a vampire on your hands, it's going to take more than burying them to afford yourself the peace of mind that they won't come back. Sure enough, we can see that precautions have been taken here, akin to those you would observe in a vampire burial. Over the years, archaeology has discovered numerous burials suspected to have been performed in a specific way, as to ward off revenants such as vampires, leaving an object in the mouth, like a stone in the chops for instance, or indeed impaling them with something, typically something metal, as wood will decay a lot faster, but wooden stakes are not unheard of. Given the power a crucifix is said to have over a vampire, that one's self-explanatory. Other precautions have been noted, such as burying a vampire face down or decapitating it, which I suppose hasn't been observed here because it would make the scene a whole lot less interesting to look at, but I suppose the decapitation part is partially represented by the skulls dotted about the place. As for the garlic dangling over the grave, it is believed, much like a crucifix, that garlic had the effect of warding off vampires, so there's plenty of evidence to conclude the body in this box is suspected of being a vampire. So, what did he do to get such suspicion cast upon him? The answer to that question, unfortunately, is likely very boring. Chances are, he just died. Suspected vampires were almost exclusively identified after the individual had died. Most vampire scares, if you will, were the result of disease. An ill-understood plague in a time when the mythological was very much a rational explanation would lead to suspicion that one of the departed was a vampire. So, corpses would be exhumed and examined. Supposedly, when exhumed, a corpse displaying irregular characteristics for decomposition under the conditions of an ordinary burial would be used as evidence of vampirism. To get an idea of what people were looking for, a lack of decomposition is always a red flag, as seen in the example we can find. Likewise, liquid blood is irregular for the deceased. Blood coagulates, it stops flowing. So, should a corpse bleed liquid blood, it would heighten suspicion. Another indicator would be hair, beard and nail growth, though I have a feeling this fella's gonna be no help here. Another tell, of course, is pained noises, particularly when the suspected vampire is prodded or stabbed, that would serve as further confirmation that the individual before us is a revenant. All of these things, of course, can be explained away with modern sensibilities. The nature of a dead body's decomposition will depend on a plethora of factors. Liquid blood in a cool environment will remain liquid for longer. The appearance of hair and nail growth can be the result of the skin retracting, and ghastly noises made by the deceased can be the result of the release of an air pocket. But say you don't know, nor have the tools to know these things, and you happen to live in a medieval town or village that has recently been swept with a plague that cannot be explained, naturally paranoia is going to run high. And that's fitting when you realise it's exactly that, mass hysteria, that propelled vampires into the spotlight of European folklore. So if somebody suffers an untimely death preceding a series of other vague untimely deaths, then suspicions the first one to die was a vampire may go through the roof. I can't imagine such instances occurring in every village, but these events have been documented to varying degrees of sensationalism. A lot of these cases seem to be localized to Eastern Europe, but it's through these bouts of mass hysteria that vampiric entities became widespread in folklore. But to turn our focus back to the one underneath the herbalist in Kuttenberg, is this man a vampire, or is he only suspected of being one? Furthermore, could this corpse nearby to him, that I've neglected to mention so far, be one of his victims, as I've seen touted online? To cure that misconception before it breeds, I think it's fair to say this woman fell victim to a cave-in. She has a nasty head injury, and if that's not enough, her leg is buried under rubble from a cave-in. So I doubt a vampire got her, let alone this man whose evidence of vampirism amounts to the suspicion of others. But that suspicion surely had to come from somewhere, right? While we're at it, this corpse didn't just appear down here one day, he was moved here for some reason. What reason could that be? Why specifically under the alchemist's shop? One thing at a time. The first thing I wanted to do was see if I could find anything vampire related outside this discovery. If it's localized to the Kuttenberg region, more accurately the city and its surrounding areas, all the better. As I was mooching about on the streets, particularly in the Jewish quarter, I happened upon these caricatures, etched into the sides of people's homes, into doors. I presume these are to identify that a home or business is occupied by Jewish people. That within itself is unrelated, but I did notice a caricature that didn't quite line up with the others. Situated here in the north of the city along the wall, I found this distinct etching. It appears to depict an anthropomorphic monster with pointy ears and sharp fangs, along with a pentagram. Considering it's next to some anti-Semitic graffiti, could this also be, albeit representing a satanic link? But I suppose it could theoretically be indicative of both. After all, let's say there's a spate of vampire hysteria. Such was medieval society that I could picture blame being thrown in the direction of those who differ. A natural fear response in humanity's very tribal nature, especially in times of uncertainty. The game being set in interesting times is basically what the plot is about. As for the people of Kuttenberg, they do have a tendency to warn you to stay in groups because it's not safe out. though it's unclear why, and may well be the tension system lingering far too long after you've committed a crime, so that, dare I say, vampiric graffiti might, for all we know, occupy 2 roles, but I'm not insistent on dying on this hill. The most probable explanation is that it's an example of blood libel, so any links to the supposed vampire may not be intentional, and I think we'll leave that at that. So in Kuttenberg, I can't say I found any concrete links to this vampire, aside from maybe his positioning underneath the alchemists. The apothecary upstairs is run by a fellow named Oswald Torvart, a master alchemist willing to teach Henry his ways provided Henry brings him coin, who's affluent enough to hire somebody else to handle the trading and a bodyguard. Naturally, his gaff is an interesting place. Not only does he have easy access to what appears to be a vampire, he has the taxidermy of a crocodile dangling from his ceiling, which is a reference to the Brno dragon, a folk tale of a dragon that once terrorized Brno, Moravia, where the supposed proof is a crocodile dangling from the ceiling of the town hall. An interesting decoration, almost certainly an Easter egg, but what does it indicate about our alchemist friend? Well, in my opinion, it's a cue that he is a worldly man. He's clearly a servant to knowledge, and his attic shows further evidence of this, because up here he has a copy of Picatrix, an Arabic book on magic and astrology, dating back to the 10th or 11th century. It's not necessarily out of place for an alchemist to possess, but it's another indicator that he is a worldly, knowledgeable man. Why that's important is because, look, if you had a suspected vampire on your hands and the body needed to be prepared in a very specific way to give you peace of mind that that vampire will not rise again and claim lives, you are not likely to want any old bumpkin doing it. And as the lit candles and torches around the vampire's coffin suggest, somebody has been down here recently. After all, fire needs a fuel source to burn. Without it, it has nothing to burn anymore, and will go out on its own. So the only conclusion is somebody nearby has been tending to this corpse, and there are only access to 2 buildings up the ladder that going down gives us a grand view of the thing. One is the alchemist's house and shop, and the other is the most unremarkable abode known to man, which of course is full of more generic commoners. Between the 2, you have to ask who's going to have the easiest access to tools, ingredients, and of course, the knowledge to make doubly sure this guy stays dead. Which leads me to conclude the alchemist who admits to being well connected, even if his meaning is to frighten Henry into not stealing from him, would possess the means to have a body exhumed and transported into the tunnels underneath his house, and then furthermore have the tools and know-how to vampire-proof the poor guy. That leaves us with one more query. Where the hell did this corpse come from? Well, I have a pretty good idea about that. The cemetery at Sedlets to the northeast of the city may hold the answer we seek. Even for a cemetery, it's a macabre place. And sure enough, a visual inspection of the grounds confirms that we can find various dug-up graves, where the coffins have been smashed open and a body is nowhere to be seen. So I'm quite certain that Henry didn't dig these up, though graves you can dig up are present here. What this could mean is there are corpses missing from this cemetery, so maybe this is where the suspected vampire came from. That thought reminded me of a quest that can be undertaken here, where we can help a monk who speaks in rhyme named Brother Morticius, who sends us into the ossuary underneath the chapel to clean up, arranging the bones into piles of cracked skulls, intact skulls, and femurs. Now this Morticius fella is interesting since he vanishes before the quest is completed, leaving us to question a groundskeeper who says Morticius has been dead since prior to Henry's birth. So either the quest was issued by a prankster or a ghost. I'll tell you which, but not yet, because Morticius here isn't what I'm focusing on. As part of the quest, we fall into a crypt deeper beneath the chapel, and it's here that we find a body that bears a striking resemblance to our vampire. As you can see, it's the exact same model minus the stake and the stone in his mouth. Again, he appears to be dressed in a monk's habit, and Henry can comment on the fact that his body does not seem to be decomposing.
What's this? This corpse must have been lying here for several decades, and it looks like he died yesterday. God, our Heavenly Father, have mercy.
So, do we have two vampires on our hands, or is this quest meant to be done before we discover the vampire location, meaning it's meant to be depicting the same person? Or could this just be an example of the reuse of a model for convenience? I reckon it's that, but this man is buried in a tomb beneath a mass grave. What makes him special? Why is he here, rather than just lumped in with all the other bones? There's a rather fancy sarcophagus at the end of the chamber, so this fellow too, in life, must have been deemed important. Judging by his attire, provided it's not some burial gown that I'm misreading, barring a different coloured hood, it bears a resemblance to the monk's gown that Morticius is wearing. So I'd like to say this is a monk. So if the suspected vampire we can find beneath the alchemist's house in the Kuttenberg mine shafts is also merely the body of a monk, then it would make sense for him to end up here in life. He likely spent a lot of time around Sedlet's monastery, meaning upon his death it's very likely he was initially buried here at this cemetery. If that's the case though, why wouldn't this chap also be suspected of being a vampire? Well, you see, this appears to be representing an example of an incorruptible body. Much like the corpses of suspected vampires, incorruptible bodies don't follow the usual expected path of decay. They aren't necessarily preserved in any way, but conditions have allowed for them to either not decay, or decay an awful lot slower. Typically, once those conditions are disturbed, decay does occur. It can be explained through science, but historically, this would be considered a sign of sainthood. Say a pious member of the Catholic Church died, his body showed signs of being incorruptible, and there was no vampire hysteria post his passing. Signs that might be considered evidence of vampirism can just as easily be considered evidence of a miracle. Even still, if they entomb the body promptly and never check on it again, the signs would not be observed. As for how the sarcophagus is now open, well, grave robbers exist. We can become one. The moment a grave robber shifts this slab out of the way expecting to see bones, instead met with something that almost looks still alive, they might be too busy wetting themselves to run, but once their bladders are empty, I don't suspect they'll stick around. That aside, longer-term embalming methods, while not the standard, have existed for thousands of years. So you get the point. There's an immeasurable inequality in why a dead body might be preserved, and in superstitious times, the timing of one's death, i.e. before an outbreak of an inexplicable plague, could make all the difference between being left to rest or exhumed and examined to satisfy folklore conspiracy theories. To close the book on Morticius, the quest ending implies we were carrying out the instruction of a phantom, but after the quest you can find the man boozing in Miskovitz, laughing at our expense for the prank he played on us, claiming to instead be the grandson of Morticius, reminding us of this game's attitude towards fantasy. With that in mind, we can conclude. Obviously, the vampire discovery is meant to be little more than an Easter egg, but with a bit of timeline loose play, it can be made to fit within the world we see. I do not believe we are grappling with an actual vampire, and the poor soul under Kuttenberg was just suspected of being one. As such, his remains have been treated accordingly, removed from consecrated ground, pinned down with a crucifix deterred by garlic, with a stone in his mouth and a wooden stake driven through his heart. And it's curious that this body can be found under an alchemist that no doubt has abundant access to garlic. But above all else, I find the historical context fascinating. People did take precautions to prevent the rise of revenants, and rather than just settling for being a straightforward Easter egg, this example does reflect that. So, as you can imagine, I got carried away with this video somewhat. I hope you can forgive me, but I thank you all for watching, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would be massively appreciated. Be sure to let me know in the comments what else you'd like to see me explore in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And if you fancy it, of course, you are more than welcome to scan the QR code on screen now and tag along to our Discord server. where I tend to spitball my ideas before I transform them into videos, and people can voice if I'm going to make an ass of myself. Otherwise, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care, and goodbye.